Good morning. My name's Tom. I'm one of the leaders here, and as you've heard, we're trying out some new tech this morning. I hopefully will be in control of my slides. If not, those guys are taking over. So we'll see how it goes. Now, have you ever noticed how quickly difficult people can become the center of your attention? Maybe it's somebody at work who's constantly critical, or somebody at school who enjoys putting you down. Maybe somebody online just seems determined to pick a fight, or just somebody whose opinion of you carries far more weight in your mind than it should. I remember when, back in my academic days, I'd written something and a popular level review of it came in and called it not even useful as a doorstop. And I was starting to take that personally until my wife Hannah came in and she said, "Relax, Tom, it's a perfectly good doorstop." And then I, recovered. But it's amazing how one difficult little voice can take over our thinking. We replay the conversations in our minds. We imagine, what might I say next time? Now, over the last few weeks, we've been making our way through the Songs of Ascents. It's a collection of songs God's people sang as they traveled up to Jerusalem. And like any long journey, if any of you have been on long journeys the summer holidays, there are high points and low points. And Psalm 123 takes us into one of the low points. The people singing this psalm, they're exhausted. They've endured no end of contempt. Proud people are looking down on them and making their lives miserable. And maybe that's where you're at this morning. Maybe somebody's laughed at your faith. Maybe somebody's made you feel small. Maybe you're simply tired of carrying a burden that doesn't seem to get any lighter. The question Psalm 123 asks isn't, how do I make this problem disappear? It's much more realistic and much more grounded than that. It's, where do I turn when I'm struggling? Now let's listen. Dave's going to come up and read the passage for us today. So over to Dave.
A Song of Ascent. I lift up my eyes to you who sit enthroned in heaven. As the eyes of slaves look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a female slave look to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God, till he shows us his mercy. Have mercy on us, Lord, have mercy on us. For we have endured no end of contempt. We have endured no end of ridicule from the arrogant, of contempt from the proud.
Thanks, Dave. Did you notice where the psalm begins? The first line isn't about the problems God's people are facing. It's about the direction of their gaze. Before there's any mention of contempt or suffering or indeed mercy, the psalmist tells us where he's looking. Did you notice there's a bit of similar language to Ed's psalm from a few weeks ago? Psalm 121 begins with the famous line, "I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from?" But in Psalm 123, there aren't any mountains. The psalmist skips straight past the world around him and looks to God himself. How do we know it's God? Well, the second half of the couplet, "I lift my eyes to you who sit enthroned in heaven." Now, the point isn't to tell us where God lives, as though heaven were simply somewhere above the clouds. The point is to show us who God is. He's the King. He rules with power and with authority over everything he's made. That's what he's getting at with this word enthroned. It's as though the doors of the throne room have swung open, and the first thing the psalmist wants us to see is the King on his throne. Before we think about our problems, the psalm wants us to remember one thing: the King is on his throne. However powerful the people around us might seem, however hopeless our situation might feel, The King is on the throne. Now, one of the advantages of poetry as a genre in the Bible is that it paints us pictures. And the idea of lifting eyes here is a particularly wonderful picture. It also invites some diagnostic questions for us. Where do you look when you're in trouble? Your phone? Your bank balance? Your car? Google? Someone else's approval? I remember when child one was younger, she had a friend who was a bit more, physical than her, and she'd often end up getting knocked over. I remember one of the earlier times this happened, she got knocked over. She didn't look up in anger at her little friend. She didn't look at her arm that had been scraped. Where did she look? She looked to me. She looked to Dad. Our eyes will naturally go to the person or the object we think is best suited to help us. Maybe it's reaching out to friends. Maybe it's trying to do things by your own strength. Maybe it's the latest self-help wisdom, you name it. The psalmist is reminding God's people that when everything seems hopeless, they should lift their eyes to God. Of course, looking to God doesn't mean we never ask other people for help. Often God helps us through doctors, counselors, pastors, friends, family. The point of Psalm 123 is simply this: God should be the first place we look, because he's the one we can ultimately trust. Now, the opening of the psalm isn't saying that we should ignore reality, that we should pretend the problems that are plaguing us aren't there. It's asking us, where is your confidence directed? Equally, we can ask, what does that mean to lift our eyes today? How do we reorient our gaze? Just a handful of examples. I think sometimes it means before we reach for our phones, we reach for God in prayer. Sometimes it means that before we spend an hour replaying every possible outcome of something in our minds, we spend a few minutes reminding ourselves of who's on the throne. Sometimes it means just admitting, Lord, I have no idea what to do here. I can't control this, but I know you're still king. With God's grace, this is something I suspect all of us need to learn to do better. But in doing so, I think it can also be incredibly transformative for us. You see, lifting our eyes doesn't make our problems disappear. But it does remind us that those problems aren't on the throne. Who's on the throne? The King's on the throne. Now, verse 1 leaves us with a question. If we've lifted our eyes to the King, what exactly are we looking for? The answer comes in the next verse. Verse 2 says, as the eyes of slaves look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a female slave looks to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God till he shows us his mercy. And there's quite a lot there. If you're like me, one word immediately jumps out: slave. Of course, when we hear that word today, we immediately think of the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade or even modern human trafficking. And that's right, we should never minimize those evils, but it's actually not the point the psalm is making. It's not asking us to approve of slavery. It's simply taking a relationship that everyone in the ancient world understood and drawing our attention to one particular feature of it. The point of the imagery is dependence. These servants don't possess the power or resources or agency to secure what they need for themselves. Their lives depend entirely on what comes from their master's hand. Everything they need comes from their master's hand: their food, their shelter, their future. The Bible uses this picture repeatedly, not because it's acceptable for human beings to own and treat one another in this way, but because it shows us how completely dependent we are on God. What could this look like? Maybe one place this might challenge us is in our finances. Wisdom matters, and the Bible certainly commends careful planning, but is it still worth asking whether our sense of security rests ultimately in God providing or in the safety nets we have built up for ourselves. Moving along, the verse, why are they specifically talking about hands? Watch the master's hand. What's special about hands? Now, there's two possibilities. First, if we take it more literally, it seems like in ancient royal courts, it was often the case that royals had little hand signals that they would use to pass information and instructions to their servants without their guests knowing. You can imagine they've got one for, hey, top up the wine, or maybe there's another one for release the hounds, like Mr. Burns. But in any case, some interpreters have gone this sort of literal route. But the other possibility, which I lean more toward, is that it's more imagery here, more poetic imagery. Hands were used in the ancient world to signify action and also often power. So for a servant in the ancient world, the master's hand, metaphorically and sometimes literally, was their source of food and protection, instruction, discipline, and generosity. So the servants are under no false pretenses about their dependence, but they're also keenly aware of the source of their provision. In a situation like this psalm presents, a servant would intuitively know, first, I can't secure what I need for myself, and two, my master has the power to provide it. The first confession is, I can't provide what I need for myself. That's humility. But the second, God has the power to provide. That's faith. It's humility and it's faith. We need both. And for the servants in the psalmist's illustration, they aren't staring at the problems around them. Their eyes are fixed on their master's hand because the response they need can only come from him. There's one more thing that's worth noting in this verse. Did you notice the pronoun changes? In verse 1, it's I. But from verse 2 onwards, it's our. This is a psalm about waiting for things to be put right, but waiting isn't described as a solitary task in this passage. It's the opposite. You can picture exhausted Israelites moving through the desert, climbing up hills in the heat. They're weary. They're enduring insult and condemnation from their enemies. They long for deliverance, for restoration, just for some help. And they're experiencing it together. They're sharing and bearing one another's burdens. That's a helpful picture for us as well, because suffering has a way of making us feel alone. It whispers to us, nobody else understands. You have to carry this all yourself. But here, the whole community speaks the sufferer's words together. There have been a few points, especially in the last couple of years, where I've not been able to sing at church. Nothing wrong with the songs, nothing wrong with my voice, just aware that if I were to try and sing these things out loud, I'd just end up weeping. And in those moments, I usually would just shut my eyes and listen to all of you singing over me truth that I needed to hear, but couldn't bring myself to say in that particular moment. This is a communal act. So first we said, lift your eyes. Why? Because the king's on the throne. Here we can say, look to his hand. Why? Because that's where provision comes from. There's one more word in verse 2 that we can't afford to miss. I think it's actually at the core of everything we're going to talk about today. I'll read it again. As the eyes of slaves look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a female slave look to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord till he shows his mercy. Look to the Lord until he shows his mercy. Not if he shows his mercy, not in case he shows his mercy, but until he shows his mercy. It's only one word, but it carries a serious amount of weight. That one word tells us two important things. First, the psalmist doesn't know when God will answer. He's got absolutely no idea how long this season of experiencing contempt from others will last. He doesn't know whether relief will come the next day, the next month, or maybe even after his own lifetime. But second, he has no doubt who his mercy will come from. The psalmist's uncertainty is about timing, not God's promises or character. And that's a really important distinction. Because if you're anything like me, you would love God to answer questions that he hasn't promised to answer. Things like, will this illness go away? Will this relationship be restored? Will I get into university? Will this person I love come back to Jesus? Notice what Psalm 123 doesn't do. It doesn't tell us when or if these things will end. It doesn't tell us whether life will suddenly get easier. It does something different. It teaches us where to place our confidence. It means that we can honestly pray in moments of deep frustration and in moments of panic-filled uncertainty. God, I don't know when your mercy will come, but I know that mercy belongs to you, and that in the end you will make everything right. Notice something else in the passage. The waiting is active, not passive. The psalmist doesn't say, I'm going to sit down quietly and do nothing until something happens. What do we hear instead? Have mercy on us, Lord. Have mercy on us. He writes it twice for emphasis. These are the sorts of prayers you pray when you've run out of polished words. Maybe you've had moments like that with God when your prayers weren't particularly articulate. All you can say at the time is, Lord, please help. Lord, I'm tired. I need your strength. Have mercy on me, God. I'm weak. And don't mistake prayers like that for weakness. They're actually expressions of faith. They're openly admitting, I can't carry this, but I do know someone who can. Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, gives us a really helpful little bit of guidance here. No stranger to anxiety or tricky circumstances himself, he writes, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. The word cast has force behind it. It's throw it onto him. He cares for you. Waiting on God is absolutely not doing nothing. Waiting on God is continuing to pray when it feels like nothing is happening. Now, finally, there's the reality that waiting is painful. Look what the psalmist says. We've endured no end of contempt. We've endured no end of ridicule from the arrogant or contempt from the proud. You can hear a heaviness in those words. This isn't a difficult afternoon. This isn't somebody who woke up on the wrong side of the bed. This is language of prolonged suffering, the kind that slowly but inevitably wears you down. They've had enough. This is the slow, grinding weariness that comes when suffering doesn't seem to end. And he honestly can't remember what it was like before. And this is important because in some Christian circles, there can be a sense of almost entitlement with how you experience life. There are some folks who actively teach that if you're following Jesus, if you have enough faith, that everything will go well for you. You'll be happy. You'll be financially successful. You'll be good at your job. And everything will go well in your family. And there's a theological term for this. It's rubbish. It's cruel. It's cruel because it tells suffering people that if they're still hurting, their faith must be somehow faulty. Psalm 123 is a necessary corrective to this because we can't try and pretend that life following Jesus isn't painful. You see, faith doesn't remove the pain of waiting. It simply tells us where to look while we wait. And it's in the looking that we find perspective, and it's in the looking that we find hope. Don't know if you noticed this. Psalm 123 ends on a cliffhanger. We never find out how long the waiting was. Never find out when or if the ridicule stopped. We leave God's people just looking. But thankfully, we don't finish reading our Bibles at the end of Psalm 123. Hundreds of years later, in the New Testament, the later part of the Bible, we meet another pilgrim. See, Jesus himself traveled up to Jerusalem. He knew the suffering he would endure there. He traveled toward it, not away from it. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus lifted his eyes to his Father. He entrusted himself to his Father. He cried out in anguish. He had endured ridicule and contempt, and he knew there was more on the way. And through it all, he kept looking to his Father. Think of Jesus praying that night. He knew exactly what lay ahead. Not just ridicule and contempt, but abandonment. The cross. What does he say alone in the garden? Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me. And then he says the phrase that echoes throughout history. Yet not my will, but yours be done. And what happens? The cup wasn't taken away. And Jesus kept looking. He kept trusting and he kept obeying, even when his Father's answer meant profound suffering that he'd asked to be spared from. He drank the cup of judgment so that people like us could receive mercy instead. Sometimes God's mercy will change our circumstances. Other times, God's mercy will sustain us in our circumstances. But at the cross, God's mercy secured our forgiveness and changed our future forever. Because Gethsemane isn't the end of the story either. The cross isn't the end. The Father raises his Son from the dead. Death doesn't have the final word. Mercy does. Because tomorrow morning, many of us are going to still wake up feeling the same challenges. The diagnosis may not have changed. Your family situation might be painful. Grief may still be heavy. Anxiety may still be there. Your unanswered questions may still be unanswered. Psalm 123 doesn't tell us exactly when our waiting will end, but it does tell us where to keep looking while we wait. And because of Jesus, we know something the original singers of this psalm didn't yet know. The first people singing this psalm looked to God for mercy, but they hadn't seen as clearly as we have how far his mercy will go. We know he shows mercy because we know about the cross and the empty tomb. God's mercy is on display in the nails driven into Jesus' hands, in his last breath on the cross, and in the first steps outside the tomb 3 days later. Jesus is the embodiment of God's love and God's mercy. So when the voices around become too loud, lift your eyes. When the waiting feels longer than you can bear, look to the King's hand and keep looking until the day when you see the fullness of his mercy with your own eyes. Because then every tear is wiped away. Death is no more, and that long wait is over. You can invite the musicians to come back. Approaching God's throne is a daunting thought. You have two options. You can approach as an enemy, or you can approach as the child of the King. And you can only approach as a child through the work of Jesus. Jesus transforms our standing before his Father. And we're going to sing about this reality just now. Over to these guys.
Let's stand together. Before the throne of God above, I have a strong and perfect plea. A great high priest whose name is love, whoever lives and bleeds for me. Let's sing that
Start again.
Before the throne of God above, I have a strong, a perfect plea, a great high priest whose name is love, whoever lives and pleads for me. My name is graven on his hands, my name is written on his heart. I know that while in heaven he stands, no tongue can bid me thence depart. No tongue can bid me thence depart. When Satan tempts me to despair and tells me of the guilt within, upward I look and see him there, who made an end of all my sin. Because a sinless Savior died, my sinful soul is counted free. For God the just is satisfied to look on him and pardon me, to look on him and pardon me. Behold the never-risen Lamb, my perfect, spotless righteousness, the great unchangeable I am, the King of glory and of grace. One with himself I cannot die, my soul is purchased by his blood, my life is hid with Christ on high, with Christ my Savior and my God, with Christ my Savior and my God. One with himself I cannot die, my soul is purchased by his blood, my life is hid with Christ on high, with Christ my Savior and my God, with Christ my Savior and my God.
Amen, amen. Please be seated.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, musicians. We've got time for a few questions, but there are no questions in the app at the moment. If you would like to ask a question, please take a couple of minutes to, no, don't take a couple of minutes, take 20 seconds to write one in the app. But otherwise, until you do that, please chat to the person next to you about what we've heard. Maybe you've got some questions, or maybe pray for each other on what's going on in your week. I'm going to give you maybe 3 or 4 minutes to do that, and then we'll see if there are any questions, and then we'll tackle that. So go ahead. If you're online, you're also very welcome to ask questions. Okay, I don't know if that was 3 or 4 minutes, to be honest, but I think it's time. Thank you, everyone, for coming through and putting in some questions, some, what did we call it, fan mail, some thank yous to Tom for doing a good job. So thank you, Tom. Let's go through these. I'm just going to tackle the one about will there be air conditioners. It is quite warm in here, but if you would like to sponsor an air conditioner, there will be one in the new building. But other than that, wear shorts. Okay, let's tackle this one first. Has it come up? Did I press the button correctly? In verse 2, it says, show us his mercy. Why doesn't it say, send us his help? Why do we need mercy instead of help?
It's such an interesting phrase, isn't it? It's not the one we expect. It's assuming that we're better than the people who are showing us contempt to say, God, send us help. Sending us mercy is acknowledging from the onset that actually I'm not really worthy of God's help either. But anything that God does demonstrate to me will be mercy. I think that's how I would approach that. Any other thoughts?
Nope, that's perfect. That's great. Thank you. Okay, next question. Tom, can you give us more examples of how you look up and fix your eyes on Jesus in the busyness of life?
Yeah, Rebecca and I were talking about this in the break. I think the idea of Lord, please help, that came to me in a season of CBT and counseling and these kind of things, just not in a season where you don't even really know what to pray. You don't know what to make of your situation. All you know is that things aren't right. Having a 3-word prayer like that in your pocket isn't just helpful, it's essential. Because there will be times, if there haven't yet been times in your Christian life where you really don't know what to pray, Lord, please help, is a really good start. So I mean, I can say that myself, that it's something that's been there for me. That was coming from my own personal experience. Yeah. How about you, Rebecca?
I think it's very easy to feel guilty about your about how much you pray and how much you spend time with God and how much you read your Bible. All we all know is we don't do it enough, but you don't need to. In order to speak to God, you don't need to have a dedicated half hour sitting at this table or doing this thing. You can just, like you said, you can be at your desk at work and just say, oh, help me, God. So, because life gets crazy. Okay, let's see. Nope, I've done that one already. Just a minute. I'm pursuing something that God has put on my heart, but I keep coming up against disappointment. How can I know it's his will and not just mine? Can we relate to that with regards to the building in a big way?
Yeah. Obviously, without knowing more of the circumstances, it's difficult to make very specific answers here, but I think a general response I would have is don't do this on your own. Chat with other people. Have other people help you to discern, is this something that God would have me do? Is this a good idea? Is it not a great idea? Do I need to tweak it? Do I need to come back to the drawing board? I think we do much better to live out faith and life and future directions in community with the people God has placed in our lives. And obviously talk to somebody who's knowledgeable and helpful and will give you good spiritual instruction. Don't talk to somebody who's just going to enable ideas you have. But yeah, find someone who, or a group of people who you know care about you, who you know love God and who you trust, and run some of these ideas by them. I think that would be my first port of call. But yeah, if you're wrestling with this, come find me, come find one of the other folks on the leadership team. Be happy to talk through this more if you'd like.
I think that relates to this last question as well, and then we'll wrap up after that. It's clear that there's a waiting period between a prayer and God's response. Sometimes, I would say. Will consistent asking in prayers hasten the response?
I mean, don't want my children to ask about this. Their persistence is manifold. But yeah, gosh, I think it is, God's not going to forget what you've asked him. But at the same time, the act of reaching out to him is something that's restorative for you in the relationship with God. I don't think there's a fine line of, I asked God for this once in January of 1992, and so we're good. I'm just going to put my feet up and keep waiting. Like, it's a conversation. Prayer is conversation with God. I don't always have the same conversation. I often talk about the same things, but in different ways as I've thought about things differently. So I think it's probably most helpful to return to these things we've asked God for with the benefit of hindsight of what's gone by in those times. I think that would be my thought. Any thoughts,
Do
Rebecca?
you find maybe sometimes what if you don't get what you want immediately, it changes what you ask for over time, and then it changes how you feel about that thing, and it changes you. And I think sometimes God is working on our hearts more than he's working on giving us what we've asked for, and that's what we need.
Yeah, very often for me it's either, Lord, please deliver me from this, or please give me what I need to get through it. And those are two very different outcomes, but I can rest confidently that God will be faithful in that. Yeah.
Still hard though.
Yeah.
Still hard. Thank you, Tom. And would you like to give us just a summary of what you've talked to us about today?
Lift up your eyes and look to his hand until his mercy comes.